well, good morning, everyone. We'll get started on our combined working group. The meeting's already being recorded. Wanted to check in. We have quite a long growing list of documents listed as still in review. So if you're with us and you own one of these documents, if it's been a while since we've addressed it in the meeting, it might be helpful to have a friendly nudge for all of us that we need to review it. But I suspect some of these are not actually in review. It looks like some of them have not been updated since April of 2023. So I think over the next couple of meetings, if we're not getting nudges on these documents, it'd be good to remove them from the still in review list so that continues to be something that we can focus on and make sure the documents are getting reviewed in a timely manner. That being said, our first agenda item for this meeting comes from Tanuj. Tanuj, are you with us?
I don't think he's around. He hasn't been around when we called him last few weeks also.
I can see that he did have some activity on the linked issue. Back in late September, he was interacting, and into October, he was interacting with a few project members. But based on the fact that the last update here is October 28th, it seems like maybe we can remove this from the future agenda.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'm going to add a comment, let him know, and so that he knows that if he wants to present, he can show up in any of our meetings in the future.
Thanks, Lynn. That's great.
I did a quick skim, and a TLDR of it seems to be allowing distribution for locality load balancing without failover. Right now in destination rule, they're coupled. You have to have failover set to do distribution, and I think they're looking for that without failover. John commented something, another issue that's also open from 2019, and yeah, folks are interested in that topic. I think we've had a couple of end users come in and ask about it over the past couple of months. Please chime in on the issue. We can get that thread revived.
Good to know.
And maybe John has a different opinion than me. I did a quick skim, so I could be wrong.
I don't know that what you're saying is an inaccurate description of the issue, or that you summarized the issue correctly and the thing you summarized was wrong, or I just don't know what I'm talking about. So I guess it's not a very useful comment. Just we should validate any assumptions there because I'm not confident on them.
It does seem like this topic and related topics around locality load balancing are going to become more and more relevant as we start talking more and more about the ambient multi-cluster API. So it's good to keep these things top of mind. Keith, it looks like you have the next topic on ext proc.
Yes. I forgot I put this here, but I do think we should discuss this. So there were a couple of conversations in Slack I'm aware of, as well as some in GitHub that I can't remember off the top of my head. But I'm wondering if it might make sense to add first-class support for xproc into the Istio APIs, like we do for xDoc. The motivation for this is because our two extensibility mechanisms for Istio today, Envoy filter, where you often will see Lua being used, as well as WebAssembly, they're both in alpha. We don't advise users to use them. So ultimately, the users often are kind of stuck in a rough place here. xproc is something that is more stable in upstream Envoy. It's a similar pattern to xDoc, and I personally feel more comfortable supporting that over the current state of WebAssembly. That being said, there are some API and semantic challenges here. xDoc fits sort of nicely in our processing limits amount of our processing, and obviously comes before a certain order of routing and everything like that. XProc is a little bit different. But we do have some XProc usage with Envoy filter in the wild. I've seen at least 1 or 2 reports of it, I think. Maybe we can explore this as an alternative to Envoy filter in WASM plugin. That's sort of the high level summary. Does anybody have any opinions here?
Can you give some examples external proc use beyond like external authorization?
Sure. So the thing that I think about would be something like header manipulation. So if I want to add a header that has information from the TLS context, for example, I want to put the SAN of the client cert in a header, or I want to put some DNS thing in a header, as one example I've seen. Users want to do a lot of things with headers. Right now, the only way you can do that is by using a Envoy filter or WASM plugin. With XProc, you could run a dedicated server in your cluster or elsewhere, who knows, where Envoy will send the request in order to have it modified and do external processing in that way. And then wait for the response back, and the response will have the requested, will have the modified request embedded within it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Keith, can you help us understand why a user might prefer this to Envoy filters or WebAssembly?
Honestly, it is a compromise. I view it as a compromise between us as the project and users. To be completely blunt, like, we don't have as a project between us and Envoy, we haven't had the bandwidth to be able to push WebAssembly to stability in Envoy. I've seen rumblings of that changing, but it's still a decent ways out. We also haven't looked at the WASM plugin API in a while, because the upstream Envoy filter that WASM plugin is based on is not stable. So it's been in alpha for a long time. Similarly, Envoy filter requires users to write raw Envoy configuration. It requires them to, it's got no API guarantees, and notably, at this point, it doesn't work with waypoints and probably won't for the foreseeable future. XProc would be a way for us to sort of move forward. It's got some production use. Notably, Google is using XProc for some of the service. I forget what the exact name is, like service connections, something. Google's using it for some of their load balancers and cloud service mesh, load balancers and Istio product. And so it's got some production burn. Users would lean on this as a supported approach for Istio, rather than the other 2 options, which are unsupported, but not unsupported, but are in alpha status.
Do we know if there are things people are doing now with Envoy filters they couldn't do with this, or is it the Venn diagram basically one circle?
That is a
there's
good.
tons of
ahead,
Envoy
John.
filter stuff that's not possible with XProc.
Because this is at HTTP only, at least. Yeah, it looks like so. Okay.
Yeah, Quad has well, I think there's some doc at Google that they could probably share about the percentages. It's more than 50% is not supported by XProc.
More than 50% of things they're currently using Envoy filters for, or just more than 50% of things you can?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, so there's kind of 2 use cases of Envoy filter. One is like inject filters. These could be WASM, XDOT, XProc, Lua, third-party thing that we don't, thing that's in Envoy that we don't support, thing that's in a third-party build of Envoy that they happen to have in their fork or whatever, all sorts of things. Those are the easier cases to handle, but or maybe, I don't know. I don't know the real numbers, so I'll say 50%. And presumably XProc could support a large number of those, or WASM, and we have all sorts of ways to configure those. But then there's all this other stuff that's just customizing random stuff in Envoy that's not really filters, like what's the max header size, what's the timeout of some obscure timeout field that we don't set in Istio, or all these other things. So those are things that can basically, in my mind, never be, they're unreplaceable. There's really no alternative to Envoy filter for those. So, other than obviously case by case, adding each one to first class Istio APIs, but that still can never cover the full set of use cases.
But I'm guessing the argument is that since this is more constrained by definition, it's easier for us to support rationally than Envoy filters have historically been. And maybe, you know, unless you're doing some really weird stuff with Envoy internals, like if you're a base case kind of person, which a lot of people are, you can just use this, and it may be easier for us to support and triage than an Envoy filter because it can't touch all that stuff. That's my read. That's what that's my read anyway. If I'm not, that's not what you were saying, then correct me.
Yeah, I think that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is it still has a lot of features. Is this one meeting the bar that was adding additional features to Istio? And I assume this would resolve some API change. So it could potentially add over complexity. Does this one meets the bar for that? I honestly don't know if other service mesh have like first citizen API for external prog.
Yeah, like I don't know the answer to that question either. I suspect not many. I think my rationale for supporting us adding xproc would be, you know, if every Envoy filter conversation was around should we make this a first class loading Istio or not, I think that's a better place to be, rather than now where a lot. To John's point, maybe it's 50%, maybe it's 40% of Envoy filter use cases are I need to extend the processing of my proxy. I need to do some custom logic in my proxy, and our extensible our mechanisms, existing mechanisms for extending the proxy have been in alpha status for a very long time. And in Envoy filter's case, will always perpetually be in alpha status. You just don't have a sort of stable alternative to do sort of HTTP processing of their traffic.
By the way, is our external RC graduated from Alpha? I'm trying to think.
I mean, augmentation policy is a V1 API.
External authorization.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of to see what the feature stages say, but I would imagine it's at least beta, if not GA. It's been around for a while, from what I can tell.
That's true. Yeah, and it's tested too in the doc.
It's stable upstream in Envoy too.
Yep. External authorization is set as beta right now.
Thank you.
I know that we had some discussion at KubeCon amongst Gateway API maintainers on basically what's the idea of doing something in Gateway API for authorization policy, and a first stab at that being based on an API like xDOS-Z. There was some discussion about like the relative merit of xDOS-Z versus xproc and what you can and can't do with each of them. I'll see if I can find those notes and share them here.
Thank you. Because I was thinking about this too. You know, if the Gateway API is going to come up with some API definition for authorization and external, then we'll have to ask user to migrate again too. So have to keep that in mind.
It's a longer term effort, so I wouldn't block something that we're doing on that. And I think those are also two different use cases potentially of like authorization policy and like just a yes or no to allow a request to continue is different than modifying a request and or response. It was just that the XDOZ API may be able to be used for more than just a strictly authorization case. I'll see if I can find that.
I wouldn't expect the Gateway API to ever add a way to do generic traffic transformation callouts, though, like this. Or at least that seems a lot farther out than just, like you're saying, a yes/no auth callout, which is pretty common.
Yeah, I mean, like
Yeah.
there's some that it supports like add headers and and like very specific transformations like that. A generic one would be dependent on the ability of multiple data planes to implement it.
So this was a pretty big topic. There's a lot of thoughts around it. Just take some time to think about it. I'm not necessarily pushing for this in the next release or anything like that. But TLDR is that I see this. I've noticed this logjam. Not logjam, but it's really a negative UX to be honest. For users, where we say, hey, here are ways you can extend your proxy. But two of them are alpha and aren't ever going to be, one isn't ever going to be bigger than alpha. We don't have the resources here in the Istio community to really push WebAssembly forward in the way that we need to. If WebAssembly was that stable, I don't think I'd even consider this. But because we do have an alternative stable implementation in Envoy, it might be worth I think it's worth considering adding.
By the way, I have one more question. Do you see this more on the east-west side or north-south side for needing external prod?
That's a good question. I can honestly see it for both. I think most usage honestly would probably be on the north-south side.
North-south, yeah.
Like I imagine like Auth0 JWT type of things, or like a Okta provider, which you can already do somewhat with our existing semantics. But this might be a interesting. No, I'm still thinking auth. For proc, I don't know. I'm honestly not too sure which would be more frequently used. Good question.
Yeah, I've seen it definitely use it on the north-south. Yeah, for east-west, I'm not sure. Yeah, so I thought just to get other people's input too.
As I think through the history of Envoy filters and WASM, and now talking about ext proc, I think I'm more interested in pursuing ways of minimizing the frequency with which users need to reach for these break glass methods. I've been working on network data planes now for, I don't know, 10 years. And all of them had a programmable option, and it was never a good idea to use it. No matter how important the use case, it always winds up with a lot of, there's vendor lock-in, there's difficulty in supportability for any managed options, there's upgrade challenges. ext proc in particular, because you're adding 2 hops to the request. There's going to be latency concerns. I don't know. My instinct would be, rather than adding more break glass functions for programmability, try to reduce the pressure for our users to adopt break glass functions in the first place, by taking the reasons that they're doing that and making them first class features. I think we talked about rate limiting being a one that's very common for Envoy filter.
I don't disagree with the general everything you just said, but it is interesting that you're saying like rate limiting to get rid of Envoy filter, but in some sense this is extproc to get rid of Envoy filter. So it's trading one mechanism of generic extensibility for another one.
Yeah, that's a good point. When I say replacing Envoy or reducing pressure for Envoy filter, I don't mean with another Turing complete interface. I mean with particular opinionated features that our customers can adopt.
I'm with John. I agree with that generally. And in an ideal world, right, WebAssembly is stable as a break glass scenario. We've got a first class rate limiting API. But I mean, last time I checked the rate limit, last time I checked the design docs folder in the Istio drive, there have been at least 3 different attempts to get a rate limiting API. It's a really tough thing to try to satisfy a lot of people. And for what it's worth, like the answer to that, just don't try to satisfy everybody. But the XProc approach is it's a practical argument from me at least. Ideally, we don't need it, but if WebAssembly is not going to move forward, then users have to have something. Is sort of my rationale.
So for rate limiting, that actually is one of the things that would be possible to implement just with Envoy's X.Z. It's a little unintuitive where we have that in Istio's authorization policy currently. But that is one of the use cases that we were looking at in Gateway API of potentially implementing in some gateway implementations through X.Z, but having a generic API that could do something like auth and rate limiting, because basically all you need is a call of some sort and a response of this request is allowed or this request is rejected, and send a appropriate response code, rather than needing to like actually modify the content of the request in flight and then transform it and send it onwards or back.
Yeah, X.Z is more like can be more generally described as a external decision service, and rate limiting and auth both fall into that bucket. So that makes perfect sense.
On the flip side, I suppose you could argue that EXTProc is not Turing complete. The service you're sending it to is Turing complete. That's where all of the complexity lies, and then the customer owns or the user owns all of that complexity themselves, rather than a solution like Envoy filter where that Turing engine is effectively implemented in technology that we own. So I guess I can see the argument there.
Yeah, it's definitely not ideal from user perspective. Like ideally, their mesh is just their mesh. But from a community perspective, exactly to your point, Mitch, the user is basically assuming a lot of the complexity of running that service, of making sure it's available, and all Istio provides is the ability to send traffic to it, and then take the request as it returns back.
In that sense, it's a lot like service insertion.
Yes. Yes. Okay, well, that's really all I have on this topic. I didn't expect to get a decision today, but it sounds like if I had to summarize the response here, it sounds like people are optimistically curious, maybe cautiously curious about an XProc type of feature. If I get some time, I can maybe put together a more concrete proposal of what it would look like, and explore the actual XDS and kind of present it. Sound good?
Thanks, Keith.
No problem.
All right, that's the end of our agenda. Did anyone else have anything else they wanted to discuss this morning?
Do we meet next week? Are folks still around? I assume we won't meet in 2 weeks and in 3 weeks.
Good point. Yes, 2 weeks and 3 weeks from today are Christmas Day and New Year's Day in the US respectively. I'll be around next week. Anyone else?
I will also be around.
Same. So
Yeah, guess I'll be here.
so let's have a meeting next week, but cancel the 2 weeks after.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank
Guess
you.
so, yeah.
Mitch, I think you only invite. I don't think I have privilege.
Yes, I'll take care of that.
Thank you.
All right. Well, then we can adjourn this until next week. And I imagine I'll see the rest of you in 30 minutes at the ambient meeting.
All right. Thanks so much for running this. Bye.
Thanks.